You didn't just sing along. You picked a part. 3 or 4 voices stacking up into one big sound coming out of the car radio on a Saturday night. They sold millions of records and packed the Grand Ole Opry for years. But the young folks today have never heard them, and most of these groups are gone now. These are 25 country groups every American grew up listening to. Subscribe before we start so you don't miss any of our lookbacks. Number 25, Flatt and Scruggs. If you owned a television set in the 1960s, you knew this sound, even if you never knew their names. That rolling, driving banjo that kicked off every episode of the Beverly Hillbillies, that was Earl Scruggs, and the man singing beside him was Lester Flatt. Together, they were the most famous bluegrass act in the world. Earl Scruggs did something to the banjo that nobody had ever done, playing it with 3 fingers in a rolling style so fast and so clean it changed the instrument forever. People still call it Scruggs style today. Their recording of the Ballad of Jed Clampett became the theme to the Beverly Hillbillies and shot all the way to number 1, the only bluegrass record ever to top the country charts. And their instrumental Foggy Mountain Breakdown got a whole second life in the movie Bonnie and Clyde. 2 plain country boys who both worked in the textile mills before music saved them, and who ended up carrying bluegrass to the whole world. Number 24, the Browns. Some harmony is so smooth it sounds like it came from heaven itself, and that was the Browns. Made up of Jim Ed Brown and his 2 sisters, Maxine and Bonnie, this trio from Arkansas had a blend so soft and so seamless that it stopped people in their tracks. In 1959, they recorded a song called The 3 Bells, the story of a man's whole life told through the bells of his village church, his birth, his wedding, and his funeral. It was so beautiful and so different that it did something almost no country record ever did. It went to number 1 on the country chart and the pop chart at the very same time, selling over 1 million copies. The Browns proved that country harmony could be gentle and elegant, not just rowdy and loud. Jim Ed Brown would go on to a fine solo career and become a beloved Grand Ole Opry star, but it was those 3 voices together, blending like a single soul, that America never forgot. Number 23, Sons of the Pioneers. Long before the honky-tonks, there were the cowboys, and no group ever captured the sound of the American West like the Sons of the Pioneers. Founded back in the 1930s by a young singer named Leonard Sly, who would later change his name to Roy Rogers and become the most famous singing cowboy of them all, this group created the very sound of the movie Western. Their harmonies were lush and haunting, like wind moving across the open range. They gave the world Cool Water, the story of a man and his mule dying of thirst in the desert, dreaming of water just over the next hill. And they gave us Tumbling Tumbleweeds, a song so tied to the American West that it still plays in the mind of anyone who ever watched a cowboy ride off into the sunset. The Sons of the Pioneers made music that smelled like campfire smoke and looked like a wide open sky, and they are still performing to this day, one of the longest lasting groups in American history. Number 22, the Wilburn Brothers. Teddy and Doyle Wilburn were 2 brothers from Arkansas who became one of the most powerful forces in country music, not just for their own smooth harmony singing, but for everything they built around it. They had a string of hits through the 1950s and 60s, songs like Trouble's Back in Town, sung in that tight brotherly blend that only siblings seem able to find. But their biggest gift to country music might be who they discovered. The Wilburn Brothers had their own popular television show, and it was on that show that they gave a struggling young singer named Loretta Lynn her first big national exposure, helping launch one of the greatest careers the genre ever saw. They were businessmen, talent scouts, and stars all at once. That tight Wilburn harmony was all over the radio for 2 decades, and though younger fans have forgotten them, the whole shape of country music in the 1960s ran right through those 2 brothers from Arkansas. Number 21, the Osborne Brothers. You have heard their most famous song 1,000 times, probably sung by a crowd at a ball game or a party, and you may never have known who made it famous. Bobby and Sonny Osborne, the Osborne Brothers, were bluegrass innovators, and in 1967 they recorded a song that became one of the most beloved in all of country music, Rocky Top. Rocky Top is pure joy set to music, a fast, bright, foot-stomping ode to a simple mountain home, and it became so popular it was named an official state song of Tennessee and the unofficial anthem of the University of Tennessee. But the Osborne Brothers were far more than one song. Bobby's high, piercing lead vocal was one of the most distinctive sounds in bluegrass, and they were bold enough to add drums and electric instruments to their music when purists said it could not be done. They took mountain music and carried it to a wider audience than it had ever known. And Rocky Top will outlive us all. Number 20, Jim and Jesse. Brothers. Jim and Jesse McReynolds carried on one of the great traditions in country music, the close brother harmony, the kind of blend you can only get from two voices that grew up in the same house singing the same hymns. From the mountains of Virginia, they brought a polished, gorgeous sound to bluegrass for over half a century. Jesse was a mandolin player of rare gifts, inventing a complicated picking style all his own, while Jim sang a high tenor that floated above it like a bird. They joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1964 and became fixtures there for decades, beloved by every serious fan of harmony singing. They were never the flashiest act, never chasing the pop charts, just two brothers making beautiful, honest music year after year. For folks who know, Jim and Jesse represent bluegrass harmony at its absolute finest, a sound as clean and clear as mountain spring water, and a reminder of a time when two voices and a mandolin were all you needed. Number 19, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. Every kind of music has a father, and the father of bluegrass was a stern, brilliant mandolin player from Kentucky named Bill Monroe. The very word bluegrass comes from the name of his band, the Bluegrass Boys, named for his home, the Bluegrass State. Without this one man, an entire branch of American music would not exist. Monroe forged the sound in the 1940s, that high, lonesome singing, that breakneck tempo, those tight harmonies flying over banjo and fiddle and mandolin. His band was a proving ground for the greats. Both Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, back at number 25, learned their trade as Bluegrass Boys before striking out on their own. His song Blue Moon of Kentucky was so good that a young Elvis Presley chose it for one of his very first records. Bill Monroe was a demanding, complicated man, but he built something that will last forever. Every bluegrass note ever played traces straight back to him. Number 18, Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. Before there was rock and roll, there was a wild, swinging dance floor filling sound called Western Swing, and its undisputed king was Bob Wills. Leading his big band, the Texas Playboys, Wills mixed country fiddle with jazz, blues, and big band swing to create music that simply would not let you sit still. You can hear Bob Wills hollering and cackling right on the records, egging his band on, shouting his famous aha as a fiddle or steel guitar took off. His masterpiece, San Antonio Rose, became a giant hit and an American standard. In the 1940s, his band was so popular they outdrew the biggest names in the country at the dance halls. He put a beat under country music that pointed the way toward everything that came later. They called him the king of Western swing, and when you hear that joyful, swinging sound, you understand exactly why a whole generation wore out their shoes dancing to Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. Number 17, the Stanley Brothers. If Bill Monroe was the father of bluegrass, the Stanley Brothers were its purest, most haunting heart. Carter and Ralph Stanley came down out of the mountains of southwest Virginia with a sound so old and so lonesome it seemed to come from another century entirely. Ralph's high, keening tenor and Carter's warm lead created a harmony that could raise the hair on your neck, especially on the old gospel songs and mournful ballads they loved best. They sang about death and heaven and the hard mountain life with a conviction that no one has ever matched. Younger folks discovered that ancient Stanley sound decades later when Ralph Stanley's chilling, bone-bare recording of Oh Death appeared in a hit movie, introducing a whole new generation to music that was already old when their grandparents were young. The Stanley Brothers were the real thing, the deep mountain root of it all, and their lonesome sound is one of the most powerful things America ever put on a record. Number 16, Riders of the Purple Sage. Riding alongside the great cowboy groups of the Golden Age were the Riders of the Purple Sage, led by the smooth-voiced Foy Willing. Through the 1940s and 50s, they were one of the premier Western harmony groups, providing the soundtrack to the singing cowboy era that Americans could not get enough of. Their sound was warm and easy, full of the wide-open spaces of the West, and they appeared in numerous cowboy films and on the radio, backing the biggest Western stars of the day. It was music for a simpler dream of horses and campfires and a bedroll under a sky full of stars. This kind of Western harmony has faded far from the radio now, pushed aside by newer sounds, but for the generation that grew up at the movies on Saturday afternoons watching the cowboys win the day, the sound of the Riders of the Purple Sage is the sound of childhood itself, pure and open and free. If you're enjoying this journey back, subscribe now so you don't miss the ones still to come. The biggest names are just ahead. Number 15, Asleep at the Wheel. Just when it looked like the joyful old sound of Western swing might disappear forever, a group came along in the 1970s determined to keep it alive, and thank goodness they did. Asleep at the Wheel, led by the towering Ray Benson, picked up the torch that Bob Wills had carried and made Western swing new again. They were a younger band with deep respect for the old music, and they played it with such skill and such obvious joy that they won over audiences who had never heard anything like it. Songs like Miles and Miles of Texas kept the dance floors full, and over the years, they would win a whole armful of Grammy Awards for their dedication to that swinging Texas sound. Asleep at the Wheel became a living bridge between the golden age of Bob Wills and modern audiences, proof that great music never really has to die as long as somebody loves it enough to keep on playing it. They kept the wheel turning. Number 14, the Willis Brothers. Here is a group that lived the whole history of country music. The Willis Brothers, Guy, Skeeter, and Vic, started out way back as one of the first cowboy singing groups on the radio, and they even backed Hank Williams himself early in his career, part of the sound behind the legend. But most folks remember them for a run of truck driving songs in the 1960s, most of all the good-natured hit Give Me 40 Acres, a comic song about a trucker trying to turn his 18-wheeler around in a space that is much too small. It became a beloved novelty, the kind of song that got the whole family laughing along on a road trip. The Willis Brothers were versatile, hard-working entertainers who could sing a tender harmony one minute and a rowdy trucker anthem the next. They were a fixture of the Grand Ole Opry and a reminder that country music has always known how to have a little fun with itself. Number 13, the Chuck Wagon Gang. For a certain generation of Americans, no sound meant Sunday morning like the sound of the Chuck Wagon Gang. This family group brought gentle, close harmony gospel singing into millions of homes for decades, and their records were as much a part of the country household as the family Bible. Formed by a father and his children back in the 1930s, the Chuck Wagon Gang sang the old church songs plain and pure with no showing off, just clean voices blending in praise. They sold tens of millions of records over the years, an astonishing number, mostly to plain country folks who played them on the porch and in the parlor and after church on Sunday. Their music was a comfort, a steady and familiar sound in hard times and good, songs of heaven and home and the sweet by and by. Younger generations have largely forgotten them, but for the older folks watching now, that Chuck Wagon Gang harmony can bring back the smell of Sunday dinner and the sound of your mother humming along. Number 12, the Four Guys. For nearly 40 years, if you went to see the Grand Ole Opry, chances are you heard the Four Guys. This vocal quartet became one of the most dependable and beloved harmony groups in Nashville, a fixture on the Opry stage from the 1960s onward, and one of the few groups ever made permanent members of that hallowed show. They never chased the pop charts or tried to be something they were not. What they did was sing gorgeous, tight, four-part harmony, the old-fashioned kind, night after night, year after year, backing the stars and stopping the show with their own numbers. Dave Rowland, who sang with them for a time, went on to form another group you will hear about in just a moment. The Four Guys were the working backbone of Nashville harmony, the kind of steady, dependable, beautiful singing that never made headlines but kept the whole tradition alive. For anyone who made the pilgrimage to the Opry in those years, the sound of the Four Guys is the sound of a promise kept. Number 11, the Glaser Brothers. Tom Paul, Chuck, and Jim Glaser were three brothers from Nebraska whose smooth, sophisticated harmony made them one of the most respected vocal groups of the 1960s and 70s. Known as Tom Paul and the Glaser Brothers, they took the brother harmony tradition and gave it a polished, almost pop-like sheen that set them apart. They had hits like Rings and became known as one of the finest harmony acts in the business, winning awards in the deep admiration of their peers. But Tom Paul Glaser had another side. He became a central figure in the outlaw country movement of the 1970s, running a studio in Nashville that the rebels called Hillbilly Central, hanging with Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson when they were busy tearing up the Nashville rulebook. So the Glaser brothers bridged two worlds, the clean-cut harmony groups of the 60s and the scruffy outlaws of the 70s. That combination of beautiful singing and rebel spirit made them one of the most interesting acts of their whole era. Number 10, the Blackwood Brothers. Some of the most powerful groups singing in American history came not from the honky-tonk but from the gospel stage, and no gospel quartet was mightier than the Blackwood Brothers. For generations, this family group set the standard for Southern gospel singing, their voices soaring from the deepest bass to the highest tenor in thrilling, spine-tingling harmony. They won a whole shelf full of Grammy Awards and sold millions of records, and their influence spread far beyond church walls. A young Elvis Presley idolized the Blackwood Brothers and dreamed, as a boy, of singing in a gospel quartet just like them. That gospel quartet sound, that big, full, four-part harmony reaching for heaven, shaped the way Elvis and countless country singers approached a song. The Blackwood Brothers proved that a group of voices raised together in praise could be as powerful and as thrilling as anything in music. For millions of Americans, their records were the sound of faith itself and the sound of Sunday. Number 9, Dave and Sugar. In the mid-1970s, a fresh new sound hit country radio, a smooth blend of one man's voice wrapped in the sweet harmony of two women, and it was called Dave and Sugar. Dave Rowland, who had sung with the Four Guys back at number 12, put together this trio, framing his lead vocal with a pair of glamorous female singers, and the formula was an instant hit. They burst onto the scene as Charlie Pride's opening act, and soon they were topping the charts themselves with songs like The Door Is Always Open. That lush, radio-friendly sound, part country and part pop, was everywhere for a few years, and Dave and Sugar became one of the most popular groups of the disco era, proving country harmony could keep right up with the times. The lineup of the two Sugars changed over the years, but the sound stayed sweet. Dave and Sugar brought a touch of glamour and a whole lot of polish to country music, a bright, shining sound straight out of the 1970s. Number 8, the Kendalls. Here is one of the most unusual and charming acts in all of country music, a father and daughter who sang love songs and cheating songs together and somehow made it work beautifully. Royce Kendall and his daughter Jeannie were the Kendalls, and in 1977 they came out of nowhere with one of the biggest hits of the decade. That song was Heaven's Just a Sin Away, a tale of tempting, forbidden romance, and it shot to number 1, won a Grammy, and made the Kendalls stars. Now, it might seem strange for a father and daughter to sing songs about sin and temptation together, but Jeannie's pure, aching lead vocal and her father's warm harmony underneath created something special that audiences adored. They followed it with more hits about heartache and temptation, always in that close, natural family blend. The Kendalls were proof that country music's greatest gift is honest feeling, and that sometimes the most unexpected pairing produces the sweetest harmony of all. Number 7. The Gatlin Brothers. Larry Gatlin had one of the finest voices and sharpest pens in country music, and when you wrapped his lead in the harmony of his younger brothers Steve and Rudy, you got the Gatlin Brothers, one of the smoothest and most successful acts of the late 1970s and 80s. Their blend was so tight, so seamless, that it could only come from brothers. Larry wrote their songs, and he was a genuine poet, crafting hits like All the Gold in California and Broken Lady with real literary craft. That California song about the false promise of chasing your dreams out west became a signature hit and a country standard. The Gatlins brought a sophisticated, almost pop polish to their music, but underneath it was always that unmistakable Texas brother harmony. Larry Gatlin's soaring lead, backed by Steve and Rudy, was one of the defining sounds of its time, and the brothers are still performing together today. That family blend is strong as ever after all these years. Number 6, the Louvin Brothers. To many who know, Ira and Charlie Louvin sang the most beautiful and most haunting brother harmony in the history of country music. The Louvin Brothers took the close harmony singing of the Appalachian Mountains and perfected it, their two voices intertwining so tightly and so achingly that they could break your heart or scare you half to death. They started in gospel, and their album cover for Satan is Real, with the brothers standing before a giant plywood devil in painted flames, is one of the most famous images in all of music. But they sang heartbreak too, and every act that came after studied them. The Everly Brothers built their whole sound on the Louvin blend. Emmylou Harris and Graham Parsons worshipped them. Behind the gorgeous harmony was a stormy relationship with the gifted, troubled Ira, a difficult man, and the duo eventually split before Ira died in a car crash. But that sound they made together remains untouchable, the very peak of what two voices can do, the harmony every other harmony is measured against. Number 5, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. In 1972, a group of long-haired young California musicians did something that changed country music history. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band traveled out to Nashville and convinced the aging legends of country and bluegrass, men like Roy Acuff, Maybelle Carter, and Earl Scruggs, to record with them. The result was an album called Will the Circle Be Unbroken, and it became one of the most important records ever made. That album connected the generations. It introduced the old masters to a whole new young audience and proved that the traditional music was still vital and alive. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band had pop hits too, most famously their beautiful version of Mr. Bojangles, but it was that circle of music, young hippies and old hillbillies making something timeless together, that secured their place in history. They honored the past and carried it forward all at once. The very title said it all. The circle would be unbroken, the great tradition passed down hand to hand, voice to voice, and this band made sure of it. Number 4, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. While Nashville was smoothing country music out with strings and background singers, one man out in Bakersfield, California, kept it hard, twangy, and electric, and his name was Buck Owens. With his band, the Buckaroos, and his brilliant right-hand man, Don Rich, on guitar and harmony, Buck created the Bakersfield sound and racked up an astonishing string of #1 hits. The Buckaroos were a real band with a real identity, that bright, stinging Telecaster sound and those tight harmonies between Buck and Don Rich that were the heart of it all. They gave us Act Naturally, later famously covered by the Beatles, and hit after hit through the 1960s. Then Buck Owens brought that sound into tens of millions of living rooms every week as the co-host of the television show Hee Haw. Tragically, Don Rich died young in a motorcycle accident, and Buck said he never got over losing him. But the music they made together, joyful, driving, and pure, is some of the best country music ever recorded, the sound of Bakersfield at its finest. Number 3, Alabama. No group did more to change country music than Alabama. Before them, the big acts were solo stars backed by hired hands. Alabama was different. They were a self-contained band, cousins from Fort Payne, Alabama, who played their own instruments and sang their own harmonies, and they exploded into the biggest thing country music had ever seen. Starting in 1980, they unleashed a run of success almost impossible to believe, with more than 20 #1 hits in a row, songs like Mountain Music, Dixieland Delight, and Song of the South that became anthems for a whole generation of country fans. Lead singer Randy Owens' warm, powerful voice and the band's rich harmonies and southern rock energy brought millions of new, younger listeners to country music. They sold tens of millions of records and were named the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year again and again. Alabama opened the door for every country band that followed. They were, quite simply, the most successful group in the history of the genre, and they did it their own way. Number 2, the Oak Ridge Boys. Few sounds in country music are as instantly recognizable or as much fun as the Oak Ridge Boys in full swing. This quartet had one of the most distinctive blends in the business, anchored by the earth-shaking bass voice of Richard Sturban, the man responsible for the most famous 4 words in country music, the Papa Momo of their giant hit Elvira. The Oak Ridge Boys actually started way back in the 1940s as a gospel group, and they were one of the greatest gospel quartets in the land before they ever crossed over to country. When they did make the jump in the late 70s, they became superstars. Elvira in 1981 was a monster, topping the country chart and crossing over to pop, winning a Grammy, and getting the whole country singing that unforgettable bass hook. With their beards and their energy and that unbeatable harmony, from the highest tenor to Sturban's rumbling low notes, the Oak Ridge Boys were pure joy, and they remain one of the most beloved vocal groups America ever produced. Number 1, the Statler Brothers. And at the very top stand the Statler Brothers, the most awarded and most beloved vocal group in the history of country music. For year after year after year, from 1972 straight through 1980, the Country Music Association named them the Vocal Group of the Year, a run of dominance no one has ever matched. They began as 4 young men from Staunton, Virginia, who met singing in church, and they got their big break as Johnny Cash's backup singers and opening act, traveling the world with the Man in Black for years. Then they stepped into the spotlight themselves and never left it. Their breakthrough hit, Flowers on the Wall, was so catchy and so clever it crossed over to the pop charts and won a Grammy, and decades later it turned up in a famous movie scene, introducing the Statlers to yet another generation. But it was the whole body of their work that made them legends, dozens of hits, gorgeous 4-part harmony, and songs steeped in nostalgia and small-town American life, like Do You Remember These and Class of '57. They sang about the things this audience holds dearest, the past, the hometown, the old friends, the way things used to be. They hosted their own hugely popular television show for years, and through it all, they never lost that warm, familiar, down-home harmony that made people feel like the Statler Brothers were singing just for them. They were the best of their kind that ever was, and they earned the number 1 spot on this list. So, there you have it. 25 country groups every American grew up listening to. The brother acts and the gospel quartets, the cowboys and the bluegrass pickers, the smooth harmony trios and the hard-driving bands. They filled our radios and our living rooms and our hearts for decades. 3 and 4 voices climbing together into something no single singer could ever match. Most of them have faded from the airwaves now, and some are gone for good. But put on one of their old records tonight, and there it is again, that big, warm, unmistakable sound. And you will find after all these years that you still know every single part. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, and watch the next video above.